So today we're going to look at hamstring activation, and we're also going to look at our forward folds. Now the reason why we're doing this video today is because it follows on nicely from yesterday, because we've already looked at about how tightness in the foot can actually knock on effect onto the rest of the muscles in the body and can actually cause tightness in the hamstrings. Now we are going to look at what tightness in the hamstring might mean, as opposed just to being hamstrings. So we talked about that back line of the body. So that's all the muscles in literally the back of the body. If one of these areas have tightness or isn't firing up properly, it can cause other muscles in the body to have to work harder. Sometimes when we've got tight hamstrings, we focus too much on the actual hamstrings, and it could be a different part of the body that's causing the problem. For instance, inactive glutes, or maybe tight hamstrings are causing hip flexors, causing a knock-on effect for the hamstrings. So we're going to cover a little bit more of that tomorrow. Today is all going to be about firing up the hamstrings, which will nicely follow into tomorrow's class. So there's a misconception in our forward folds that when we come into them, we need to have dead straight legs. And one of the reasons why this might not actually be beneficial for us is because it's not actually firing the muscles up needed. If you're like me and you've got a really long arm span, I can easily come into what looks like a really deep forward fold because my fingertips can be in line with my toes. But if I'm being perfectly honest with you, I don't actually feel any muscles being worked here or any activation in the body in this position. So maybe just quickly come into a forward fold now and just check and see how that feels. Can you feel any muscles in your body having to work? And I want you to be really honest with yourself. Sometimes in yoga, we get too stuck up on like what the pose looks like, that end perfect Instagram famous pose. Now, although they look good, it doesn't necessarily mean that we're optimizing our movements or even engaging the correct muscles to come into that. So I want you to forget about what your perfect forward fold looks like. And I want you to think that folding comes from a hip hinge. So that's the first thing that we need to activate when we come into our fold. In order to come into that hip hinge, bend your knees slightly, and then you have to really push your bum behind you in order to fold down. Now, whether your arms reach the floor or not really isn't a big deal. What I want you to try and do is make sure that this feels like a sustainable position that you could actually hold, and that you're allowing gravity to pull the spine down towards the ground. Now, whether the legs are bent or straight, it really doesn't matter if we're activating those hamstrings correctly. So, one thing that we can do in order to get that activation in the hamstrings is this next exercise. So, just stand hip width apart, and I want you to imagine that you've got something on the underneath of your foot. So maybe you've just stepped in chewing gum and you're trying to wipe that off the sole of your foot. So all you're going to do, pick the foot up, kick it behind you. So I'm just going to show you from the side. We're going to go from one side to the other as we try and kick the foot behind. Now you might already be able to feel that the hamstrings are having to work here. What we're then going to do is we're going to do that same action but not take the foot off the floor. So, feet hip width apart, drive the right foot into the ground, imagine you're pulling it back. If you've got socks on, your foot might slide a little bit, that's not a problem. And you're just going to go from one side to the other, trying to pull that foot back. Now, if you can't feel the activation here, that doesn't matter. You might be able to feel a little bit more when we come into our forward fold. So just do one more each side. Imagine you're taking that chewing gum off the sole of your foot. And then we're going to add that to our forward fold. So soft bend in the knees. Remember, that movement all comes from the hips. So as you hinge from the hips, fold down. Arms can drop. Maybe they come down towards the floor or not. Now, press the feet into the ground. Try and take the right foot back as if you were trying to get that chewing gum off your shoe. And then keep that activation as you do the same with the left. Now you'll notice whether your legs are straight or bent, you've still got that activation of the hamstrings. So if your hamstrings feel super tight so you can't straighten your legs, it doesn't matter. As long as you've got that kickback motion, you'll feel that your hamstrings are still having to work to hold you here. Now over time, what that will do is it will increase the strength of your hamstrings, the mobility, and also should hopefully increase your flexibility in your forward folds. So we will cover this a little bit more in tomorrow's video, but when we think that we have tight hamstrings, we become a little bit obsessed and it's all about stretching the hamstrings and nothing else. If you are continually stretching your hamstrings but you're not noticing any difference, it's probably not your hamstrings that are actually tight. It could be the fact that your hip flexors are super tight, which are then pulling on your hamstrings, making them feel like they are tight. So we're going to cover that a little bit more tomorrow, but one thing that we can do in order to release those hamstrings without continually stretching them is to get your trusty ball, and we're going to do a little bit more trigger point exercise. Now you want quite a solid ball, so a tennis ball is okay, but you just don't want one of those soft ones that when you put any weight on it, it collapses. What you're going to do is you're going to start at the very top of your hamstring and you're going to place that ball underneath. Now I want you to try and drive the weight down through the leg, and then we're going to extend the leg from the knee and we're going to contract and lengthen that hamstring muscle as we're working into it. Now you might come across a spot that feels like, oh my God, this is the point that's really tight. If it is, I want you to hold on that point, keep breathing until it becomes a little bit looser. And you're just going to continue working up the hamstring, straighten the leg, bending the leg. And again, this is a really good way of working through the muscles, releasing any knots in their fibers and releasing those hamstrings. So with that exercise, try and make it last between 30 and 60 seconds. And then before you instantly take it onto the other side, how about coming into a forward fold, noticing any difference from one side to the other, and then maybe repeat it on the other. Now, if you know you've got one really tight hamstring and the other one doesn't really give you many issues, then just do this exercise on that tight hamstring. Controversial, I know there's always a saying that you should always work both sides, but when it comes to the hamstrings, there's no need to really stretch it or to do this exercise unless they really need it. So give those a go and hopefully that'll increase your forward fold. Let me know how you get on.